Hello, artists. I am Dr. Lisa Belisle. I've met and interviewed many of you for Radio Maine, and most recently I had the pleasure of working with Emma and Kevin to do a session on personal narrative and how we can use personal narrative and build our own personal narrative as an artist in various places. One of the places that we know people enjoy having a little assistance with is the artist remarks, but sometimes it's also helpful to understand your personal narrative when you're standing talking with perhaps a potential buyer at an opening, or even outside the gallery entirely as you're interacting with people, just helping them really create humanness around the work you do, particularly for people who are non-artists. When I think about things, I think about stories. And I know that if you're an artist with Portland Art Gallery, sometimes your stories probably have quite a bit of visual element to it. So today I'm going to present this in the Dr. Lisa style of art, which is, let's say, very rudimentary, but hopefully create enough of a story and enough of a process so that you can feel comfortable working on your own personal narrative, which perhaps you can use the next time you go to do your artist remarks for an opening, or maybe just going into the gallery, having this information available to Kevin, Emma, Sean, Jess, anybody who's there, because the more you're able to drill down on your own personal narrative and share your story, the more others can do that on your behalf, and the more art you will sell. That's the ultimate goal. So thank you for joining us on our online version of the class we did recently during our artist meeting. The first thing we're going to talk about today is our foundation. And it's always good to start with a little bit of background on the foundation, because particularly for artists who have an interesting story about their foundation, where they came from, it's really something that people want to know about. So when I think about a foundation, if I'm drawing a picture of this, my squeaky little marker here, perhaps I think about foundation as kind of the ground, all of the lovely grass, all the things that have kind of creating growth in your life and progression as an artist. So what does that mean from a practical standpoint? So what is your foundation? Maybe your foundation is, I received my training at the Mass College of Art. Maybe your foundation is, I am self-taught and I actually self-educated myself in art. Maybe your foundation is even less about art and maybe more about your personal connection to art. It's something that people will find important to the work that you are actually doing as an artist. So if I were to describe my own foundation, if I was doing my own personal narrative, I could say, hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Belisle, and I've been a longtime family doctor. My whole family, we are all doctors, and that's made it really interesting for me to be a doctor in this day and age. That is my foundation. And that is the sort of grass that we are growing from. Foundation. Part 2, the next thing we're going to talk about is context. Now, the overarching context, if you're thinking about personal narrative, is that you are wherever you are. That you are seeing people who are interested in knowing more about you as an artist because perhaps they've shown up at the art gallery. But let's assume that the context isn't, I'm going to go to my local Hannaford and I'm going to have to explain from the beginning that I'm an artist. You're talking about people who are essentially, let's call them pre-qualified buyers. They're already showing up. So what is that specific context? So the foundation is kind of your background and what brings you to that place. But the actual context is, what are you talking about? Where are you today? Who are you talking to? So if you're giving artist remarks, you know that you're talking to the people who have actually shown up at the art opening. Or if you're in the gallery during the art opening, even if you didn't give artist remarks, the context is maybe you're having a one-on-one conversation with people. So when I think about context, I layer on, again, squeaky marker. And you can tell these are all color-coded because we're all artists here. Layering in the ocean. The ocean is kind of it's a changeable thing. The water that's on top of the foundation of your growing grass. So your foundation is, this is where I've come from. This is how I came to be here. The context is, this is where we are now. the water is the interaction, who you are and who these people are. And it's always good to understand where people are coming from, because if you're going to be targeting your narrative, you want to target it in such a way that they can understand it. So that's going to be our context. All right, moving on from context. The next thing we're going to talk about is motivation. And in particular, if we're going to talk about artist remarks, or even if we're going to talk about a recently changed body of work, then the motivation is, why did you decide to do, in this case, what you are doing for this body of work today? So when I think about that, I think about a little boat on the ocean, because again, the water is ever changing. It's going to move things around. But now if you've got that visual interest of the boat on the ocean, now you really want people who are talking to you to be like, oh, I get it. I see why they decided to do encaustic. I see why they decided to change the imagery in their pieces. So this motivation is very important, because sometimes it can be really interesting and really inspiring, and can cause people to think, oh, I now understand the story behind what I am actually seeing on the wall. So motivation, that's going to be layered on top of foundation and context. Motivation for what you are talking about today, why you actually did this work. The next thing we're going to talk about is actually the hook. And really, your whole conversation with people should be interesting and engaging. You shouldn't be waiting until this point in the presentation to talk about the hook. You want to hook people in. But let's just assume people are already kind of hooked, because either they came to the gallery opening or they're standing in front of your piece of work. So they're kind of hooked. So you really want to get them to feel emotionally connected. So when you talk about the motivation for doing the body of work, can you somehow make this interesting or relatable to them, or somehow emotionally connective for them, so that they actually, now that they're looking at the boat on the ocean, they see that little red sail. They're actually thinking, oh, I want to be part of that narrative. I want to be part of that artist's existence by buying a piece of their work. I see that boat on the ocean. I see the boat has a lovely little red sail. So that's what we're calling the emotional hook. So here is our boat. Here is our little sail. That is the hook. Now, the one thing that I love to see when people are giving artist remarks, or even in any situation where they're in front of people who are already interested in their work, is I love to see a call to action. Some people feel like it's important to end their remarks with thank yous. Thank yous are fantastic. I love it when people say thank you to the gallery during their artist remarks. But an even more effective thing to do, particularly if you're trying to sell your work, is to actually end with a call to action. What is it that you want people to do as a result of having this conversation with you, as a result of listening to your artist remarks, or as a result of having a conversation with you in front of the piece? And I'm going to put this in a different color. I don't have yellow. It's a yellow piece of paper. But I'm going to draw this as the sun, because really this call to action illuminates all of what we just talked about with regard to your narrative. Because your call to action is, I invite you to bring one of my pieces into your home and try it out and make it part of your family. Or this piece on the wall, after our artist remarks are over, come over and talk with me. I'd love to tell you more about my process. Because one thing you'll notice we haven't spent a lot of time on during this whole narrative discussion is process. And process can be very fascinating. And in fact, if you wanted to put process in, maybe you want to put it under motivation for this particular piece of work. But what I wouldn't do is focus on process. Because even though you will have some art buyers and art lovers who love to hear about process and want to get very in deep with your process, remember that your context is going to be variable. So if you're talking to a large group of people as far as the artist remarks are concerned, then they may not understand what very technical art terms are. It may be interesting to know that you spend 20,000 hours on a painting. That is really interesting. What's going to be maybe a little less interesting is perhaps specific ways that you do technically your work, just because that's the audience. Now, if you're talking to fellow artists, absolutely, talk about process. But returning to the call to action, let's have the call to action be, if you want to learn more, talk to me. Or, I'd love to have you bring one of my pieces into your home. Or, one way to support artists is actually to buy our art and really leave it on the lap of the person that you're talking to actually do something on your behalf. They're here, they're listening to you, they want to know what they can do, and you're going to say, this is what you can do. You can buy my art. So I hope that this made sense as far as all of the different steps. And I'm going to come back in a minute with a few final thoughts. And also, we're actually going to have a few examples of how this narrative process might work out by having some people that you know well get on camera and do their process, but I'll leave that as a teaser. So I'm going to stop right now and remind you, foundation, then context, then motivation for your body of work, then hook, then end with call to action. And always be thinking, how can I reach these people? What do they care about? What is it that emotionally I can share with them to put the kind of cherry on the top of the cake on top of all of these other interesting things that I've had to say about myself?
Hi, my name is Laura Mrazek. I'm a painter with the Port Knot Gallery. I've always been interested in art, but I remember when I first felt that spark. I was a senior in high school, and we had an assignment that turned into my first acrylic painting. And I spent the whole trimester creating a painting for my parents' 25th wedding anniversary. It was them on a fishing date when they were younger. And I remember thinking, I can't believe it can be this thrilling to create something. And I always had two passions throughout my early life: the artistic creative side and then the athletic healthcare side. And I ended up moving into a career, healthcare career, started in, doing athletics, health education, and moved into a healthcare administration role. But I always continued to create art for my friends on the side here and there. And then into adulthood, we often reach this phase of rediscovery. And for me, it was reevaluating my passions in life. And after I became a mother and had my second child, I needed to find myself again. I needed to create something that was my own. And I was able to revisit that feeling of creating and feel that thrill again. And much of my recent work is representative of phases throughout motherhood, my experiences, whether that's the symbolism of a flower that I'm painting or a more abstract interpretation of the raw beauty and organized chaos of motherhood. And we're often searching in our lives, whether that's through parenthood or adulthood in general, for a reprieve from our daily lives. And my goal when I create is to paint something that will provide a visual escape for viewers throughout my creative and expressive process. So I invite you to ask me any questions about my process or about the representation in a particular painting.
Hi, my name's Annie Darling, and I am an encaustic and oil painter. And I became inspired to create art at a very young age. I grew up around Chicago, where there are many museums and galleries, and I was dragged to them all of the time. And I really appreciated seeing the art. And I created some art when I got home from these gallery visits. And partially, I was inspired by my family, who's full of artists. There's writers and designers, photographers, sculptors, painters. And so I was just surrounded by art in my whole youth. So it was all around me. And so I couldn't help but becoming an artist myself. My motivation when I create is always to explore. My work is often a conversation between me and the particular piece I'm working on. It's sort of a question and answer from the piece to myself, where I'm always responding or reacting to something that I just did in the work. The abstract nature of my work allows others to see what they want to see in the pieces. And I'm always delighted when people look at my work and they discover things that relate to their own life. And that is when I feel like the work goes from becoming my work to the collector's work, is when they find ownership of something in their life that connects them with the piece. So I invite you to come talk to me about my work. Ask me questions. I'll talk you through the process or anything you'd like to know. And I'd love to know how you feel about the work and how you connect in particular to any of my pieces.
Artist Brian Emerson here, and I thought I'd just take a few minutes to give you some background on myself. Raised in New England in a family that supported the arts and creativity. I always enjoyed painting and drawing and being generally creative. I did fairly well with it through my education and schooling. But it really wasn't until I married into a family of working artists that I put it into gear. That was in the mid 90s. And my wife and I were young and moved up to the family compound. And I found myself immersed in the studio of a professional working artist, Philip Barter, my father-in-law. And I was all in. I got a chance to see his process. I'm working with him on bigger installation pieces. I'm going to art openings. It's just this whole exciting world, and I wanted in, and I made sure that happened. As far as me as an artist and my process now, I really truly enjoy painting and drawing and exploring this great state of Maine that I live in. There's an endless supply of inspiration I found from the coast here up and all the way to the mountains. I never run shy. My sketchbooks are always full. Right now I'm working on a small series of paintings just from my neighborhood and with all the beauty that spring has brought. Next week I'll be up on one of the Cranberry Islands off of Bar Harbor with my wife and some family members. I'm sure I'm going to fill another sketchbook up there to bring back to my studio here in South Portland. So it's really, Maine is my general inspiration. I think being out there in nature, walking around, it's natural to want to document it. I like to bring it back to my canvas and my paper, whatever you're working on, and put your perspective on it. When I am out and about, I do try to make sure I have my sketchbook or my art bag with at least watercolors and maybe some gouache I like a lot, just to get some general composition and colors down. But a lot of my real work takes place in the studio back here in South Portland. My hope with art is that others who view it might enjoy my take on it, my perspective, but I do try to leave some looseness in the imagery for interpretation. I like it when people they might recognize an image that I've painted from the coast of Maine or something, or they might not. But there's some room there that they can make it their story. Maybe it reminds them something that they grew up with. They can relate to it, and that's really important to me. If you're interested in my art, viewing my art, I show at the Portland Art Gallery right downtown in Portland, Maine. It's a great, amazing space, gallery. The crew down there is so friendly and helpful, not to mention all the artists that I share wall space with, truly inspirational. And it means a lot to me as an artist when I do get feedback from people who have come in to view or purchase art and support an artist. So thank you for that so much, and supporting an artist. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dale Roberts. I am from upstate New York and currently showing at the Portland Art Gallery. I'd like to give you a little bit of background about me. I grew up in a very rural community, a farming kind of town, a very small area. It was about 1,500 people. And I had no idea that you could be an artist and make a living at that. But I always loved drawing and painting. Well, it wasn't long before way led on to way, and I found myself at RIT in Rochester studying foundation art. And I quickly learned that you could pursue art as a vocation, but then I also was advised that I needed to go somewhere else because there wasn't enough at RIT for the things that I was interested in. So I ended up applying and getting accepted to Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia. And at Tyler, I further found out more about making art your vocation. Found out many things that were already swirling in my mind were worth pursuing. One of those things was the interest in ancient mediums. And also I found that my interaction with the visible was going to be the foundation for what I was doing. And so to me, it became something of a life mission to communicate those things that I saw around me, painting from life, into paintings that would bring about an understanding of some of the ineffable qualities of the world, sorts of beauty that you can't really put your finger on. And so that became, for me, the thing that was most interesting to do. Along the way, I became deeply committed to pursuing high quality craftsmanship, making paintings and drawings that would stand the test of time physically, And also the ancient media that I was interested in had particular qualities. And those qualities really helped express what I was after. And so for me, the thing that became really important was to be able to share that with others. Um, to spend time in front of the motif, the landscape, the still life, studying it and really analyzing it, and then painting those things, and then sharing that with others. So then when that happens, you get a chance to put work in a gallery. And when you do that, people then have a chance to come and interact with that work. And for me, that's part of the most gratifying aspects of making art, is to interact with people and watch them interact with the paintings and to see what they're finding as they do so, and to kind of give them permission to go ahead and spend time with the work, interact with it on their terms, and to perhaps see the world in a new way. In fact, one of the best comments I've ever received was someone saying to me, Dale, I've driven by that spot many times, and I never saw it until today. And when that sort of thing happens, it's very affirming and gratifying. And so when folks come into the gallery and they take a look at work, there's that piece of interaction that happens, and it's a wonderful piece. But along the way, you want to stop and think, what if that piece is grabbed you enough that you think you might consider collecting? Well, that's the other part of the life of a work that is sort of fulfilling beyond words. That's where people take the work home and they interact with it daily, and perhaps they share it with others. And, I've got work around the studio, and when people see it and they're interested, that's one thing. But when they see it in a gallery setting and they've made that commitment to come in and take a look, and then they decide they're going to participate in that vision, well, that's so gratifying. In many ways, that's icing on the cake as far as why you do the work. So these are the things that make art worthwhile, make me want to put it up on the wall, and I guess involve a kind of bravery that says the mark that I'm making is one I want you to see. So I want to thank you for listening to my thoughts on these things, and I hope you'll enjoy the work and get a chance to see the Portland Art Gallery, where they have wonderful other works by other artists and a staff that's very helpful in helping you take that journey into understanding art and perhaps making the jump to being a collector yourself. Thank you.
So a final few words. Now, again, this little class that Kevin and I are putting together is something that we're doing for people who couldn't be there in person. And it made more sense when people could ask questions, but we're happy to put this out there. And hopefully this will make more sense as you're listening to the way that a couple of our special guests will have put this into place themselves. One thing I will say is that when I listen to artist remarks, or when I talk to artists for Radio Maine, or when I'm in the gallery overhearing how an artist is talking to people, the things that are most effective when I'm in any of those situations is people's level of confidence and commitment. And when we ask people in our in-person class, who here likes public speaking? Of the entire room of people, there were 2 people, and one of them was me. If I didn't like public speaking, I wouldn't be on Radio Maine. I wouldn't be doing this experiment with this online class here for you. But we know a lot of people don't like public speaking. That's okay. We still want you to commit to doing this work. Commit to mapping out a visual of what you want to say. Commit to your story, because it's interesting. Your story is uniquely yours, and it is going to be what draws people in and what connects them to your art. We already know your art is beautiful and wonderful, or else you wouldn't be in the gallery. But what we're going to do is we're going to make people really emotionally want to invest, and hopefully financially want to invest in your art. So in order to get them to commit, we need you to commit to your story. The other thing is, tell this story with confidence. When you stand up and do artist remarks, we know you're nervous, Everybody gets nervous. Even I get nervous, and I like to be a public speaker. When you stand up there, if you stand up and you start with, "Great to see everybody tonight. I'm so happy to be here," then that draws people in. If you stand up and you say, "I hate public speaking. I don't know how to do this," you're going to get sympathy, but is that what you really want? You want people to feel badly for you? No, you want people to actually buy your art. So stand up there and tell your story. Nobody's going to be critical because everybody understands it's hard to be a public speaker. The other thing is, and this is all part of this same kind of conversation, is you're really committing to yourself. If you're committing to your story, you're telling it with confidence, you're committing to who you are, which is exactly what you need to do as an artist. It takes a lot of courage to commit to actually doing art. So by committing to your story and telling it with confidence, you're committing to yourself, you're committing to your life path, and really you're committing to your art. Not every profession has the ability to actually put something out into the world that others can enjoy and put on their walls and find emotional attachment to. It's just, this is such a blessing that you are offering this out into the world. I know this because I have many of your pieces on my walls, and I love going to the art openings. So in telling your story, in committing to your story, and telling your story with confidence, you're committing to yourself, you're committing to your art. This is what we want you to do. We want you to feel like you have all of the elements that we've talked about today, that you can line them up, and you can come up with some sort of way that you can tell your story so that it'll draw people in. I am continually drawn in by the conversations I have with you on Radio Maine, and I'm continually drawn in by your art. When I have somebody who has wonderful art and I know that they're a wonderful person with a wonderful story, that just makes me really want to engage in their art and their artistic practice. And that is what we want for you today. So we appreciate your working through. This is Kevin and I. This is part of our art. Our art firm is to put together these videos. This is a little bit of an experiment, this type of art. So we hope that you've gained something from this conversation today. And one thing I would suggest after you've had a chance to see how this kind of thing can be put into place is maybe collect the information, maybe put some things on cards for yourself so that you can follow the process as we've described it. Maybe line up a little narrative for yourself and maybe record it. Have somebody record it on an iPhone. Or maybe you can actually do it for Kevin. Maybe you can do it for Sean or Jess or for Emma. I know that any of these individuals are interested in helping you share your story and are completely willing to help make modifications if you have questions. And this was one of the things that we were able to do live and in person. Obviously, it's harder to do by video, but if you take what you've learned here today and you translate it into something that you are willing to share, then people will be able to give you feedback, which as an artist, we know is really important. And then, ultimately the thing that is most effective when it comes to telling stories is doing it again and again and again, just like doing your art. The way that you've learned to do art is by practicing it. So the way that you're going to be able to engage in the art of narrative and engage in the art of bringing people in and understanding your story so that they can become part of your artistic community is you're going to practice it. And maybe you practice it on camera, maybe you practice it by coming on Radio Maine, maybe you practice it by multiple conversations during art openings with people that you meet along the way, but that's really the way you get better at it. There's really no magic. Well, it is magic. It's all really magic, but it's a magic that you have access to. So we appreciate your willingness to sit with us in this conversation today virtually. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation, and I look forward to seeing you at our next artist meeting or perhaps our next art gallery opening, maybe even a Radio Maine conversation. Thanks again. I'm Dr. Lisa Belisle.